Let's go ahead and talk about Amazon EC2 pricing options. Selecting the right pricing model is very important for running any application in cloud. When you select the right pricing model, then only you are able to utilize the most benefits of the cloud. So let's go ahead and see what are the options available for Amazon EC2 as a service. So I would say EC2 price options, I would divide them into four categories: on demand instances, reserved instances, savings plan, which I call reserved instance 2.0. I'll explain it why, and then spot instances. These are the four ways of paying for Amazon EC2 instance. Now we have to be clear here about one thing, that these options which I select doesn't have a different performance level for EC2. What I mean by that? So I logged an Amazon EC2 instance. Let's say that EC2 instance had 4 CPU in that and 16 GB of RAM. Now that is the physical characteristics of the system. Whether I pay for it in on demand or reserved or savings plan or in spot, the physical characteristics won't change. It would still give me the 4 CPU and 16 GB performance. These are the billing entities which are applied at the end when the bill is generated. Like, let's say you ordered some food and you have a coupon which will give you 10% discount. So food would remain same only when the bill is generated. Because of the coupon you have or because of a membership of a specific club, you may get some discount or you may have a discount voucher which you could apply towards paying for it. So food would remain same. Similarly, EC2 would remain the same, but its billing would be different. The price you pay would be different depending on how you have selected and what kind of option you have selected for EC2 instance. Now, I have listed them in the category of highest price to pay up to the lowest price to pay, and these two are more or less similar. That's why I have put it into a lower price tier. So three tiers we are discussing here in a way: highest price, lower price, and then the lowest price, which is with spot instances, and we'll discuss them, why some is on higher side and why somebody is on the lower side of the instance. I prefer to explain technology through daily life examples. So let's consider that you have come to London, you landed upon Heathrow Airport, and now you want to go to hotel or home or maybe to a place. What options you have for local transport? Let's remove public transport as of now. Let's consider that we have a lot of luggage and we don't want to take public transport. So probably from London Heathrow Airport, I could hire a taxi. With taxi services, we pay for going from point A to point B. No commitment further. Point A to point B, I pay the money. I do not care about the salary of the driver, road tax of it, vehicle insurance, fuel cost. They charge me based on how much I use the service. That's all we mean by a on-demand type of instance. In on-demand pricing model, when you launch an instance, you pay by the second if that instance is Amazon Linux, Ubuntu, or Windows-based instance. So you run an instance for 200 seconds, the billing would calculate based on 200 seconds the cost, and then you would pay for it. So that is my on demand. Whenever I need it, I would have that instance. Once my work is done, I would terminate it. I would no longer worry about further payment happening on it. So whatever I need, I would deploy. Could be one instance, could be thousands of instances, and I would only pay when I am running these instances. If it is Windows, Linux, and Ubuntu, I would be paying per second pricing. And if it is some other operating system, then my price will be hourly basis. So if I have used that system for 49 minutes, I would be still paying for 1 hour. If I have used that system for 61 minutes, I would be paying for 2 hours. I could start them anytime. I could terminate them anytime. No problem at all on that. Now, this can be a good use case for some unpredictable workload. Now, unpredictable, I would say, are into two dimension. Unpredictable in terms of performance or in terms of duration. What I mean by that? I do not know whether I would be having a requirement to run a machine with 2 CPU or 10 CPU or 16 CPU, or maybe sometime it would be higher, sometime it would be lower. That time it is an unpredictable performance. Better to use on-demand pricing for that. Duration, if I'm not sure, I'm just doing a proof of concept. I'm testing a project. I'm testing something. I may need instance for 1 hour or maybe 10 hour or maybe 10 days or 100 days. I am not sure. That time I would prefer to have a on-demand based pricing. This is like hiring a taxi, using it for whatever time you want, then all done. No need to pay further on that. So that is my on-demand instances, either pay by second or pay by hour, more suitable toward unpredictable workload. Let's talk about reserved instances now. These instances, when I say about reserved or savings plan, these are referred also as commitment based purchase. You are making some commitment here. What type of commitment? I'll explain that in a minute. Let's say you move to London and you would be living here for a longer period of time. You are not just a tourist for 4 or 5 days. Maybe you have planned to live here for, let's say, 6 months or 1 year or whatever. Now, if you would need transport every day, then getting taxi every day may not be very efficient, may not be very cost effective. So maybe you would look for options like, hey, I want to lease a car. So when we are leasing a car, now leasing of car may not be allowed for maybe 1 day or 2 days. You may require some long-term commitment to be made that I want to lease it for 3 months or 6 months or maybe 1 year or whatever. So that is a way of reserving a capacity. That car stays with you, whether you use it or not, that is with you, and you would pay a monthly fee or a yearly fee depending on the contract you negotiated or the lease you acquired on that car. Same applies in EC2. If you feel that I have a workload which I plan to run for a 1 year or 3 year term, I would prefer to reserve that capacity. So that is called reserved instance, where you make a commitment to AWS and say, hey, AWS, I would be running this type of instance for a length of 1 year. Can you give me some discount because I am going into a long-term commitment? Same like when you rent a hotel for 5 days, you may not be having that much of discount, but if you are renting a hotel, let's say for a month, probably you would be able to have a better discount applied because of the long length of time you are committing to stay there. Same applies here in reserved instances. You have a commitment here for 1 year or 3 year term. This would be well suitable for the application or workload which are long running and which require predictable performance. Or I know what is their performance characteristics. Would I need one server with that much of CPU or this much of RAM? That time I would prefer to have a reserved instance, and that reservation when I am making, I may have to tell Amazon AWS that hey, I would be reserving an instance in a specific region in a specific AG. That can also be there optionally. You can specify. You may specify which type of instance you would be needing and what type of operating system you would be needing on that. So when you are leasing a car, you would say type of the car you are interested to lease, how long you would be leasing it, and then maybe some additional thing like is it should be a manual or automatic transmission. So that would be your reserved instance, well suited when you are sure how long you would be running your workload because it is a commitment. So if you had rented, if you have, sorry, reserved instances, let's say you reserved a C5.24 extra large instance for 1 year. And maybe you powered on that instance only for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. Still, you are liable to pay the total amount of 1 year commitment. So you leased a car for 1 year, you rented an apartment for 1 year. Even if you are on vacation for 2 months and didn't live into the apartment, you are still liable to pay. So that is a reserved instance. So that is well suited when you are sure what your needs are. We will then go for reserved instances. What if we go ahead? Here we are seeing that we are making a technical commitment. We decide on what technical requirements we have and then we make a commitment. What if we want little flexibility? Let me take another car example here for leasing. What if the car provider I am leasing from has a flexible lease option? It says, hey Ashish, you could go ahead and rent a car on lease, but I would give you flexibility that if you want maybe a van to shift your house, maybe you want to drive a bike and feel some wind in your hair, go for it. I won't stop you, and you would be still paying me a dollar value per month, but I am giving you flexibility that you could switch it to a car or to a bike or to a truck depending on your use cases, but the commitment is still there. But instead of making a technical commitment like reservation for AC or region or instance type, what is happening here? Here the commitment is on the fixed amount I am going to pay to AWS, and that may be, hey, I would pay you $10 per hour for compute, and in that, whether I launch one instance or maybe a Lambda function or maybe a container, I am just making a commitment for a compute workload. That is what a savings plan is. Now, savings plan itself has two categories. One is called compute savings plan, and one is called EC2 Instant Savings Plan. We'll talk about them later, but savings plan is a flexible commitment you are making, and that flexibility is in terms of reservation. Technically, you are flexible, but you are still making a dollar value commitment, but you can choose your own way of delivering things. Region, your operating system, instance type can be exchanged within savings plan, and you will still get the discount on that. So that is called my savings plan, a flexible lease provider, right? When you make these commitments, based on your commitment, because this request you would raise first, say I want to reserve 10,000 EC2 instances, you raise that request, AWS would verify and confirm that they have that much of capacity at their backend availability zone and region where you are requesting, and then only approve your reservation. So if you are making a lengthy or a high volume reservation, it may take little time to get a confirmation. Smaller reservation may be approved automatically, but for a lengthy reservation, you may have to wait for a while because AWS would provision that much of capacity in their backend so that they can sustain when those requests actually come. So that is a reservation. And as they are making changes and they are committing their own environment behind the scene for your use case, that's why it is a commitment which you have to pay even if you do not use these instances. All right. Last option here is a spot instance option. Let's go ahead and try to understand this option. What if you need a car, you come to London and you say, Ashish, you are not going to office. Can you give your car to me? I would be happy to give me my car. What you did here, you asked a friend if they are not using that car, then you can ask that car from them and they would be happy to give it to you because you're a friend, right? So same thing applies here. Spot instance is basically the unused capacity of AWS infrastructure. Let me write it down, AWS infra. What I mean by that? Now, let's assume for an example, let's say in London region, AWS has capacity to run 50,000 instances, just a random example. I don't expect that they would have 100% utilization. They would always keep room for scalability and for spikes to come in. So let's say this is 50,000 instance total available, and out of that, currently only 35,000 instances are being utilized or being used by the customer who are using it either in a on-demand fashion or reserved or savings plan fashion. So that is currently being utilized. That would clearly mean that AWS has now 15,000 instances which are not being utilized at all. They are sitting there idle, not generating any revenue for AWS. So now AWS says, hey, we would offer you these 15,000 instances to choose from on a very steep discount. You would be able to leverage it on a very steep discount related to getting a car from the friend. So if a friend is not using the car, he or she can give it to you and then you could drive it. You just have to worry about the fuel cost and maybe some toll taxes if you are going to those places, but you are still much cheaper way of running things than a taxi or lease. So that is a spot instances. This is purely based on supply and demand of the available resources, right? Now, here, the commitment is that your friend has given you your a car, but the friend says, "Hey, I'm not going to office regularly, but if they call me, I would need my car, or maybe I have to pick up my kids from school at this particular time. So please return that car at that time or before that time to me." Same goes into AWS. Let's see this how it manifests here into AWS environment. So these were 15,000 instances which you got on a very discounted prices. Let's say you consumed 10,000 of them. You started using these 10,000 instances, which means free capacity now available on AWS environment is 5,000 free. Done. Now, in the same time, what if these people who are using 35,000, they say we need 6,000 more instances. Now, total capacity available is 50,000, sorry, 5,000, which cannot fulfill 6,000 requests. So what AWS is going to do now, it would say we have given 10,000 instances into spot tier or in spot model. What we will do, we would fulfill that capacity by terminating 1,000 instances from here. That would make free available capacity to 6,000, and then we will fulfill the request of 6,000 instances. Like your friend could call back and say, please return the car. Same way, AWS can claim back these instances which are given to you on a very cheap price because the supply and demand ratio has shifted now, right? So when this happens, you would be getting a 2-minute notice of termination. So AWS to your operating system would send a signal, and that 2-minute notice would be saying that your system is going to be removed or would be pulled back, and you have to take some necessary action so that you can sustain that particular problem. Right. Now you may be thinking, isn't 2-minute notice very short? It is, but if you plan it properly, you could leverage these instances in a very cheap price and you would be able to keep your application cost to very low level. I'll give you some examples that what can be done in this 2-minute notice. Now, before we go into that discussion, we have to be aware here that spot instance may not be the best use case for the most critical workload. If a workload is critical and I have to a always have a service running, probably I won't be using spot instances. Like if your friend has an ambulance, you won't be willing to borrow that ambulance temporarily because that is a critical thing and he or she may need it at the very short notice to go and get to provide help to someone. So in those critical cases, spot instance may not be a very useful thing, but you could use that spot instance in a various ways. So we would say not every application would benefit from spot, but some common applications can always benefit from spot. Like if you have an application which is non-critical, right, which is stateless, right, and which can withstand any interruption. If an interruption happens, I won't have a problem. I would still keep on functioning. After interruption, I would resume and will start back. So those type of application would benefit most from the spot. Now let me explain all these things, non-critical, stateless, and interruption on a blackboard. Let's go ahead and talk about it. So you have your instance running. Maybe you are running an application here. What we would use these instances for, mostly running some stateless workload. So application is running, it is processing some data. Probably that data would be stored somewhere outside of that instance. the state of that application would be maintained elsewhere. Maybe it could be a S3 bucket, could be a database, maybe a queue, or whatever external mechanism you want to use. Now, application is running. Let's say it is processing a job. That job finished 30% of processing, 70% still remaining. That information is stored here. And now AWS issues a termination notice to this instance. What you could do now, you could gracefully come out of the job, have the state stored into some external storage. This instance will get terminated, and then you could run another instance, and that instance can then pick up from where it left, start processing. Let's say it was able to process up to 70%, got termination notice of 2 minutes, no problem. That data is now stored here. This instance gets terminated. We get another instance ready, and that instance can pick up from where it left and then finish the work if the need be. So these type of instances these type of application which are stateless, which are non-critical because we may not get the instance that very moment when we need it because there may be not the supply available, and which can withstand interruption, those are good candidate for spot instances. And you can very creatively use these instances. Another option you have here, that when you get this 2 minute notice, it is the compute capacity which is taken away from you. If even you have a volume attached to this instance, that volume is not deleted. So maybe as soon as this 2 minute notice comes to you, you could initiate a snapshot of the volume, or you could hibernate your instance, and once have capacity available, you could resume from where you left. So if you design things properly, it would give you a steep discount to run your application. And how much steep it could be, what benefit in terms of cost I would have, I'll explain to you that in a minute. So be aware, spot instances will be good use case where you are not critical. When you do not have a timeline to meet, then stateless workload interruption is okay with your application, then spot can be a good use case to follow along. So hope this thing is clear. Let's go ahead and see the details of spot. So spot is unused capacity of AWS infrastructure, purely supply and demand based pricing, which will dictate how much would be the cost associated with spot. So let me go ahead and explain all these things here. Now, before I explain you spot, people get confused when they hear reserved instance. Reserved instance doesn't mean physical reservation. Reserved instance doesn't mean that, hey, AWS has selected a server rack, found out what you requested, and then it has put name of that person here, that this server belongs to that particular person. No, it is not like that. This reservation is in terms of, think like it is a coupon. So you bought whatever you bought. Your monthly bill is being generated, and then you say, I have a discount code, and that would give me some percentage of discount. So that is what happens here. It's not like a physical reservation. It is just a discount which is applied at the checkout or at the month end when your invoice is generated. So if you have used that instance capacity in that month, what you reserved, you would get a discounted rate. Anything beyond it would be billed on a regular rate, whatever you have applied for. So that is a reservation. Coming back, shifting gears to spot instances again, let me show you spot instance information into console. You could get some detail about the price benefit you may get. So here is my EC2 console, and I am going here to spot request. I should be able to see the details of spot requests if I have made. I am interested right now into something called pricing history. So through pricing history, I would be able to say what kind of benefit I may get in a specific instance. So let's go ahead and let's search for C5.24 extra large instance with 190 GB RAM, 96 CPU inside. Let's see the pricing. Linux, and I want my history of data for the last 3 months. Let's see what happens now. What I see here, I see detail of on a demand price. If I run a C524 extra large instance on an hourly price, I would be paying $4.08 per hour. But if the same instance I get on spot tier, I would be getting around 60.32% discount in US East 1A, 1B 57, 1C, 1D. As you could see, around 60-70% discount is what you are getting because of using a spot instance, and this is based on data of 3 months. And if you see here the fluctuation, that is telling me that the prices can go up and down, but you can clearly see that it never goes to, let's say, 4 or 4.5 or 3.5. It is always into a very low range. So if I can properly use my system, design my application, I should be benefiting from using spot instances. Shouldn't be a problem at all. So that is my spot instance. Now, one more interesting tool which you could also leverage is called Spot Instance Advisor. Let me bring up that tool here, and you would have a link of it into resources section. The Spot Instance Advisor gives you a detail that what is the probability of your instance being pulled back by AWS. Right. So I go further, and let's say I select the location of Northern Virginia, and now I want to see what is the frequency of interruption here. I have these instances available as you see. Let me display all 595. I'll quickly go through the list so that you could relate. Now, if you see here, this is my frequency of interruption. Now, it is a percentage, so you quantify it. Where maybe you run that instance M616 extra large, which will give you 50% is 54% discount from on-demand pricing, and interruption frequency is 5%. Probably you run 100 instances, 5 of them would be taken away, or you run one instance for 100 hours, maybe for 5 hours it would be interrupted, but it is less than 5% of interruption frequency. Then if you keep going down, there are 600 around instances. You would find some instances which have higher frequency of interruption. R6GD.metal 5 to 10% interruption frequency. I go further, M5A extra large 10 to 15%. Further, maybe more than 20%. So if you properly design your application, you should be able to create an environment where you have picked up instances which have less interruption frequency, and probability of interruption happening in your workload would be minimized if the need be. Right. Plus, we will discuss in future about a feature called auto scaling group. What you could do in that auto scaling group, let me draw this thing. Let's say you have a requirement to process some data, you need 100 EC2 instances. Okay. What if I could diversify my type of instances? So I say here, I would be utilizing and using maybe 20 instances which are coming from on demand or reserved instance tier. I can't speak at type at the same time, on demand or reserved instance, or maybe savings plan, whatever. So these 20 are not going to be taken away from me. And now I say for the remaining 80, I would be using spot instances. It's like companies would hire temporary employees when their season is on peak. Like maybe Amazon would hire temporary employees in the Thanksgiving time or Christmas time because they would have more orders and they have to fulfill that many orders. So maybe they would hire temporary employees. Spot instances are like that. No long-term commitment. Now, in this 80 spot instances, I can again be diversifying my workload. I could say, okay, out of this 80, 20 I would be taking from, let's say, C5. Another 10 I would pick up from, let's say, C6. Another 10 I would pick up from M5. You get the idea? So I could diversify my application workload in this manner. Benefit here is, let's say, due to capacity crunch, my C6 instance are pulled back. I would still have C5 available. I would still have M5 available. So I would not be running into almost zero capacity most of the time. I would have something available, and these are my not the spot instance. These are not spot instances. So I would not be having any capacity crunch for these 20. They would still keep on functioning. Only 80 may get affected, and even because of diversification, even those 80 may not be completely taken away from me. So that kind of configuration can be done, but that is possible by a feature which is called auto scaling group, or in short, we call it ASG. So we'll discuss about them in the next chapters. So I hope this thing is clear. Now you could design your application in the way you want, and there are a lot of use cases you can find on internet and Amazon documentation which tells you that how customers benefit from these spot instances. So I hope this thing is clear and you have a better idea on the pricing part of AWS services, how EC2 services work, for pricing option on demand, for unpredictable workload, reserved, predictable workload, savings plan, again commitment for predictable workload, and spot, a supply and demand based pricing which you could use. So hope you got a better idea. And there is a service summary card for Amazon EC2. This would be available into your resources section. So you should be able to get more detail and read this information to get a little bit more idea on how Amazon EC2 actually works. So I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. I would talk to you into the next section. Thank you.